Hi, my name is Jason Anker. When I was just 24 years old, I fell off a roof on a building site after falling from just 10 feet from an unsupported ladder. My story is very typical of an accident, the rush job, the unplanned work, not speaking up. But today, I'd rather speak about the consequences of that poor, safe decision I made that day and the impact on my life, my family, and my friends. After leaving hospital, my wife, she walked out after just one day, taking my 2 young children. My marriage had been having problems before my accident. I really didn't know how to cope. I turned to alcohol and to drugs. It was a cry for help. At the time, I didn't know how to speak about my feelings. In 1995, 2 years after my accident, I was involved in an unintentional drugs overdose. It put me in a coma. I was on a life support machine for 17 days. My mum and dad were told after day 15 that there was nothing more they could do. They suspected I had serious brain damage, and there was advice to turn the machine off. So you try and imagine that my mum and dad had had the whole initial trauma of my original accident, watched their son's life just disintegrate in front of their eyes for 2 years, are now faced with the decision of basically switch the machine off and watching their son die. Luckily for me, my dad said no, and on day 17 I opened my eyes. The damage was very similar to having a stroke, so I was sent to a stroke unit for rehabilitation, and I was there for nearly 5 months. I came out of hospital with a new determination. Abbi, my daughter, she came back to live with me full time. I used to see my son Sam as much as I could. He was living with my ex-partner.
I can't ever actually remember my dad not being in a wheelchair, and it's something we never really spoke about. Didn't really know anything about Dad's accident until I was a lot older. And I sort of started struggling really when I was a teenager, when I went to secondary school mainly, and I made new friends and wanted to go out, and Dad's anxieties and the way he was struggling with it affected our relationship, which actually resulted in me moving to live with my mum. Something I didn't want to do, but I literally just couldn't live with him anymore. And it wasn't until he started to deal with his accident that things got better, and luckily we're back to being as close as we were before.
I was very fortunate at this time to discover disabled water skiing. It became a focus, but unfortunately I was still battling my depression, didn't feel like I could speak to anybody about it, and still drinking quite heavily. And so the year 2000, Sam, who's now 8 years old, he came to live with me and his sister. But I always remember the day that my dad went to pick him up. Sam came back, he came walking down the drive with a little bag on his back with some of his clothes. But what do most 8-year-old lads also carry with them everywhere? A football. You tell me how I'd missed this for 8 years, but I'm sat in the garden on the patio. It was a lovely summer's day, watching my dad kick a football around the garden with my son. And I just suddenly became aware that I was never going to kick a football with my boy. But then one day, he came from school in his football kit from training. He sat right in front of me and asked me a question. Why have we never played football, Dad? I wanted to lie and tell Sam that I'd been involved in an accident that was that was not my fault, but if you can imagine the look on his face when I said, it was all because I had fell 10 feet from an unsecured ladder, and the look on Sam's face.
And he told me that if he had like a minute to walk, out of everything, he'll just choose to take me for a kickabout. So that's something that gets me every day.
And the guilt that I feel towards my kids of not being able to do the things that Dad should do.
I just wanted to share with some examples of how it's still affecting us and has been affecting us to this day, so many years after his accident. The first big one for us was my wedding day, which is 6 years ago now. And it was just the big things like him walking down the aisle. We could understand why everyone was so emotional on the day.
How was I supposed to walk my daughter down the aisle?
To us, I was just happy that my dad was with me. But literally walking down the aisle was quite hard. I mean, he kept wheeling on my dress for one. Later on, we had Scottish Ceilidh dancing. But because of Dad's chair and the room we was in, it was something he couldn't take part in, and he was at the side sort of watching all our close family and friends at that big part of the day. And I can always remember looking over at him, and he was happy, but it bothered me, and it's something that he shouldn't have been missing out on.
And on February 3rd, 2017, Abbi gave birth to my first grandchild, a lovely granddaughter, but for me, it's now gone full circle, because am I ever going to bounce my grandkids on my shoulders at the seaside? No.
All the little things that you don't really think about is what he's now missing out on again, and we're missing out on again. So everything he couldn't do with us as small children, he's now reliving it again, and he can't do it with his granddaughter. I mean, just everyday little things, when she runs in and she wants to give her granddad a hug and he can't pick her up, and it's them little moments that are still so heartbreaking. It's that realisation that it just doesn't ever end, and it's just going to keep going and going. And as Dad gets older, we're just faced with different situations all of the time.
And all because of something I did, something I chose to at work one day that I knew was unsafe. 2005, finally got my day in court, and my barrister said to me, if we continue and win, you will get substantially more. But we are still running the 50-50 risk that we could leave here today with nothing. I accept the offer. Told I'd paid in 3 months, but it took 2 years. So I finally paid some compensation, 14 years after my accident, receiving a cheque for £408,000. You think this was a turning point in my life, but I soon became aware of how bloody depressed I was. And so I just started spending. But nothing I did and anything to me. I spent the next 2 years back and forth to Tenerife. But then in 2008, a Christmas party, a chance meeting, a guy came up to me and said, how come you're in a wheelchair? Have you had an accident? I said, yes, at work, I fell off a ladder. He said, would you mind telling me your story? He was not so much interested in my accident. Oh yeah, he wanted to know what I'd done, but he was more interested on the impact that poor safe decision had had on myself, my family, and my friends. My mum and dad had been so traumatised, and not because I'm in a wheelchair, more that I couldn't cope being in a wheelchair, that if I rang my dad now and told him I got a puncher in my wheelchair, he'd break down and sob. If he ever comes out for a pint with me, he has a couple of drinks, and still he can get emotional, and this is now 28 years after my accident. My mum, again, because of what I put through over the years, that today she still suffers with mental health. My sister, she has been my rock. But my brother, he also struggled, and not because he was embarrassed of me, but simply because there was nothing he could say or do to stop me going down the road I went. And the worse I became, the worse that affected my brother. Up until the end of May 2015, I had Sam, he come out working with me for about a year. Then out of the blue, he resigns. I just can't do it, Dad. I can't sit in the same room and listen to that story every single day. The supervisor on the day of my accident, he was a guy who was actually footing my ladder when I came down. When I got to the bottom, thinking I was down, he actually moved away. Now, he blamed himself totally for my accident. He came to the first visit to the hospital, and when he realised how bad it was, he couldn't live with the guilt. He actually split up with his girlfriend, leaving a young son behind, and he moved away. We've had no contact to him since. Now, we don't know the impact of my accident has had on his life. I can always remember being stood at the bottom of the ladder. I realised it was unsafe, and I chose not to speak up. And because of that decision I made, the impact of my life, the impact on that choice I made that day, is still affecting me and my family 28 years later. So please, if you believe that someone's unsafe, speak up. Share that with a supervisor or a manager. But also, if you're a manager and somebody comes to you with a problem, please listen.